This is a second session that we've done, excuse me, on accessibility. If you go back and you look on our YouTube channel, you'll see one we did about a year ago where the focus was very much on a kind of a real deep dive into all things accessibility, but also adding it to your automated tests and using Ruby as your underlying language to do that. So a slightly different focus this time. We are going to be using WebDriver with JavaScript this time. We'll show you some TypeScript as well, virtually indistinguishable, but we'll show you both options. But there's a focus on what's new in 2.2 now, WCAG 2.2, okay, which arrived fairly recently, slightly later than first expected. But nonetheless, that is now the new standard for WCAG, with impact on single A, double A and triple A variations as well. So this is just a shorter webinar to just kind of bring you up to speed with some of that. Of course, we'll recap some of the things we talked about previously, but the idea is always that you can be up and running. In this case, we're going to be using the Test Evolve Spark framework with Flare for the recording, Spark as the underlying engine for JavaScript and TypeScript, and then Test Evolve Halo for the real-time reporting of those accessibility violations, should you find any, when you're running your tests. All right, so that will be our setup today. As I say, we'll look at what's new in 2.2, not nearly as much as there was when 2.1 arrived, so it's a smaller update, it certainly feels like. And again, as we're doing this, we'll explore what you can expect, what you should be looking to automate by way of accessibility checks, and the things that you can't or you shouldn't. I think we all accept now there's at least 35, 40, 45% of your accessibility testing will still be somewhat manual in nature. All right, that's just a widely accepted kind of ratio, if you like. And then finally, with the kind of tool set we're using today, we'll look at how easy it is to make accessibility testing a regular part of your continuous testing pipeline. As opposed to just making kind of periodic checks and coming back to it 6 months later. Why not do it on a daily, on a weekly basis, every sprint? Start looking at the trends of your accessibility violations and make sure that you are continuously improving and not taking a backward step. So that's what we're going to focus on today. All right, let's get started. Let's take a quick recap about the very basics of accessibility. All right, so just having a clear understanding of what it is. We've talked about this before, but there's some very definite definitions here, right? So essentially, access to the web, the internet, by everybody, regardless of any perceived disability that a person may have. All right, so it's got to be designed to work for everybody, regardless of their system setup, their location, their language skills, or their physical abilities. Things are accessible when you meet that objective of making it available, accessible to that diverse range of people. Okay, and there are different types of disabilities or impairments, of course. Could be audible hearing, motor impairments, movement, and the one we probably most associate with visual impairments maybe, and cognitive abilities, of course. So as any organization designing, building, testing, delivering software and applications for your customers, all right, let's focus here on web apps and web tools. Building in accessibility from the get-go should be very, very high on your list in terms of wanting to deliver high quality products and not excluding people from being able to use those. Okay, that absolutely wants to be very, very high on your list as an organization. All right, so that's what we're talking about for accessibility. Now the focus today is on 2.2. All right, so an international standard. Until recently, we've been focused on 2.1 as the most recent. 2.2 arrived in October of 23 last year. About 6 months late. It was due to be out in around April, May time, I think. So a little later than expected, but it's now out there. In just a second, we'll talk about exactly what it incorporates. As I said earlier, it was a smaller update than 2.1 was. Okay, version 3 is still in draft. That was something that was started in July of last year. And having just looked at the repository myself prior to doing this, it's moving very, very slowly. All right, so there have been minimal updates to the draft throughout 2024 whatsoever. So it's underway, but I wouldn't expect it anytime soon. Okay, so just to refamiliarize you with the kind of the main standards, the big three. Okay, so from a US centric basis, we talk about section 508 and ADA. On a more kind of international basis, and certainly probably more so for Europe and the UK, we tend to focus on the WCAG. But there are others as well, not so well known, but they have their part to play. So we have the Equality Act of 2010 in the UK. There's the European Accessibility Act and the adherence to ACT rules as well. So it's not my intention to dive into any of these in real detail right now. The focus for us is on WCAG 2.2, but just be be wary, be mindful when you're having conversations around accessibility, and if you're working with a particular customer, consider where they are in the world. Where is your customer? Are they US based with US customers? If you talk about section 508, it's likely that you're talking about people that have a connection to government function and services that are provided in that way. If you're talking about a customer in the UK with an e-commerce website, your measure for accessibility is highly likely to be the WCAG standards. So be aware that there are different standards that are more regionalized, shall we say. But if you're looking to get started, my advice is going to be focus on WCAG, as that will sit as an international umbrella kind of set of standards and guidelines for anything that you're doing. And in fact, some of these other standards, Section 508, ADA, probably the European Accessibility Act, they probably simply refer to WCAG as its source of truth anyhow. Okay, so let's look at what's come along in 2.2. If we consider what's new in 2.2, as I said, compared to 2.1, 2.2 only brought along 9 additional checks. 2.1 brought along 17 additional checks. 2.2 just brings 9, of which 3 of those 9 are considered necessary for AAA compliance. 4 of the 9 are considered necessary for AA, and 2 of the 9 would be considered single A compliance checks. All right, so 2.2, it was published as a W3C recommendation web standard on the 5th of October 2023. It was expected in April, as we say. In terms of the areas that they sit beneath, if you like, so 3 of those are under the navigable idea. 2 of them are under the input modalities. 1 of them is under the predictability side of things, and 3 of them come under the input assistance category. All right, so let's take a quick step through. They are kind of bunched together. There's definitely a focus on visual impairments and motor impairments with some of these. And with cognitive abilities taken into consideration here as well. So they are kind of grouped together. Let's just take a quick look. So 2.4.11, so this is a navigable item. So focus not obscured. This is considered a minimum type of check under the AA side of things. All right, so we look at the what and the why. So the what is ensure that when an item gets keyboard focus, it is at least partially visible. Okay, why is that? People who can't use a mouse need to see what has the current keyboard focus. All right, so that's a AA check. An enhanced version of that, focus not obscured, enhanced for AAA compliance, so related of course, ensure that when an item gets keyboard focus it is fully visible, so no longer partially but fully visible, for exactly the same reason. People who can't use a mouse need to see what has keyboard focus. Alright, so two flavors of check there, a minimum and an enhanced check. 2.4.13 focus appearance. This is a AAA check, so using a focus indicator of sufficient size and contrast. Okay, and the why, many people can't see small changes in visual appearance, including older people. Alright, so clearly targeting the visual impairment side of things here. But then we move on to more of a motor impairment. Okay, so for people that are not particularly comfy with working with a mouse, for example. So we have the idea of dragging movements. So a click and select and a drag with a mouse. This is a AA check. So for any action that involves dragging, provide a simple pointer alternative. Some people cannot use a mouse to drag items. And I think if you probably stop to think about it, we can all think of times when maybe we've needed to do that. And the need for AA compliance is to provide within your application an alternative means for your user to be able to effect the same outcome. All right. Target size. This is a minimum check for a AA compliance. So ensure targets meet a minimum size or have sufficient spacing around them. I think we're essentially talking about buttons and call to actions. Let's think about maybe a checkout button in a commerce website, for example. Some people with physical impairments cannot click small buttons that are close together. You almost wonder if this it doesn't feel like an entirely new check. You'd expect that this was something that previously existed in a standard. Maybe there's an alternative version of it, but certainly new within 2.2. And then we come on to the help side of things. So consistent help. So this is just a single A standard. I guess it's probably just very good practice for any application builder, right? So put help in the same place when it is on multiple pages. I mean, some of these you'd put in the fairly common sense category, I think. Okay. People who need help can find it more easily if it's in the same place on any page that they're on within the application. Okay, moving on. Redundant entry, single A check here. So don't ask for the same information twice in the same session. So some people with cognitive disabilities have difficulty remembering what they entered before. All right, so yeah, an interesting one there. Kind of, you think of that maybe in terms of that entry of a new password and the repetition or the confirmation of that password, for example. And it is, I mean, we come on to these next two. It's interesting because some of these authentication methods, capture is the obvious one. It's not particularly congruent with an accessible application. So that in itself is a challenge. People want to make things secure, of course they do. And we're all used to multi-factor authentication now. But it's not very friendly to people with accessibility needs. All right. So yeah, always worth bearing in mind. So let's look at the final two. So accessible authentication. So the minimum standard or check for a AA compliance. So don't make people solve, recall, or transcribe something to log in. Right, and straight away we think of capture, don't we? Some people with cognitive disabilities cannot solve puzzles, memorize a username and password, or retype one-time passcodes. So straight away you can see the challenge with security and accessibility there. The challenge being to find that middle ground, a way in which solves or works for both parties, if you like. The enhanced version of this, so the AAA for accessible authentication, don't make people recognize objects or user-supplied images and media to log in. Right, this is the typical capture. Okay, what did I see the other the other day. I think I saw a capture. It said simply click on everything that would require petrol, something like that. And of course, it wanted me to click on motorcycles and buses and then there was a kangaroo and a croissant, right? But this is exactly the type of thing. We're all kind of used to it now, but it's no good from an accessibility standpoint. As it says, some people with cognitive disabilities cannot do puzzles, including identifying objects and non-text information that they previously supplied. So this is what 2.2 brings. As we say, 9 checks, fairly evenly split between single, AA and AAA standards. In summary, smaller than 2.1. And as we said earlier, version 3 of the standard is in draft format and still some time away. So not an extensive list of additional checks that you need for your 2.2 compliance, but good to be familiar with them. Okay, so as we start to recap on what we spoke about a year ago in terms of what can and can't, or what should and shouldn't be automated, really what I've done is take some of the additional checks from 2.2 that we've just been through and added them into the green and the red list, what you can and what you can't. And as you will probably deduce from kind of listening to some of those checks, when we talk about things like dragging the mouse, we're talking about focus indicators, contrast, sufficient visual indication, locations of help, etc. You can start to see fairly clearly that you would assume that the majority of those would still need to be manually checked. And certainly with 2.2 that is the case, right? So only one of those 9 from the 2.2 standard makes it onto the possible to automate list, if you like. All right, so that's the one at the bottom there, the target size. So programmatically with tools like Axe and TestEvolve Spark that uses Axe, you can determine that elements on the page meet that criteria. So that can be automated. It can be made part of your automated checking. The other guys here, keyboard focus, indicator size and contrast, mouse dragging, help location, redundant entry, so not entering the same thing 2 times in a row, and accessible authentication. Again, think captcha and variants of captcha. Quite understandably, these things, as yet, I say, that may change in time, but right now, with the majority of accessibility tools out there, you cannot add them to the automated testing side of things. So if you're looking to ensure your app is 2.2 compliant, you'll be adding these kind of checks to your manual accessibility testing lists. Okay, so yeah, quite simply in the things that are possible to automate. So yeah, anything that's kind of talking relationships and HTML hierarchy, yes, programmatically that can be checked with an automated tool. When we look at things like ARIA, roles, the states, the properties, validity, relationships, best practices from a coding point of view, that can all be checked. Color contrast is something you might think at first glance that actually, that would require more of a manual check, but in fact it is something that it's one of the easiest actually to check with an automated tool, with an automated check. And then the one that's usually going to throw up most automated accessibility testing errors are things like the naming of elements on the page, making sure that they have all of the attributes that they should have to allow screen readers and things of that nature to do their job properly. Okay. In the not possible to automate list, we're talking about error identification. We're talking about focus order on the screen, so the way in which, if you continue in that application, you're going to move from section to section. Screen reader testing, of course. These things are just not going to be possible to automate. All right, so that's an updated list with the 2.2 additions there. Okay. Look at how quick and easy it is to create your first automated accessibility test. All right, so I'm in, this is TestEvolve Flare. This is our cross-platform studio application. You can see down here that I can create Ruby, JavaScript or TypeScript projects. Python will be there very, very soon. Now I've already created my project, so I'm just going to go in and open my JavaScript project that I'll be using for this demo. Okay, so it's just going to check my installation, make sure I've got the right versions of Node and npm, etc. Excuse me. And it will open up with some demo tests that are ready to run. But for the purposes of this, I'm going to record. I'm going to use the web app recorder to very quickly build a flow. In a second, we'll talk about the options you have for running your tests as part of CI/CD. Two different schools of thoughts, but we'll come on to that. For now, I'm just going to create a new feature scenario and a set of given when then steps. If you know anything about us and Test Evolve, you'll know that we are very much embedded with the use of BDD and Cucumber. Okay, so the recorder, the first thing it's going to allow you to do, in fact, it's the only tool that allows you to do this, is to create your features, your scenarios, your given when then steps, and then record user journeys and generate code either in Ruby, JavaScript, TypeScript, or Python directly to those Cucumber steps. All right, so it's a very, very quick process now. So we'll call this accessibility demo. That's our feature name. And we'll simply say user runs axe check on website. All right, so the quickest and easiest way is to use the Test Evolve element capture page, which is hosted on our .com website. You'll see that in just a second. So given I load the home page, then I can run an accessibility check. And that's really all we need for the purposes of this. Okay. I'm going to click on my first step, my given step. I'm going to activate the recording process. You'll see that a window pops up, and then we'll be loading the element capture page, as I say. So this is the default view you're always going to see. It quite simply has a range of different HTML elements you can click on, you can type into, you can enter, you can do various different things. But the idea with this page is that it gives you everything you would ever be likely to see on a web application, so you can click on it, activate it, work with it, and see the code that's generated. So just to give you a flavor for each of those languages, what that code syntax is going to look like to check that it exists, or to click into a radio button, etc. You get the idea. So for now, I've already got a URL in here. Okay, I mean, I could of course change that to Amazon.com, whatever I want, but for now I'm going to activate the recording button. I'm going to click on just kind of enter or go to page, and you'll see that it records that on the left hand side there. And to be as brief as possible, quite simply, if I want to run an accessibility check on this page, I'm going to right click. I am going to add here an audit check. So audit covers both Lighthouse and Axe based accessibility checks. So I do that. And the idea is we just give it a label. Okay, so the label you'll see is useful in reporting terms because it's most commonly going to be used to denote which page of the application you were on when you ran this audit check, or this, in this case, this accessibility check. So similarly, I'll just call this homepage. All right, so add check, and you'll see on the left there, it's recorded that check. Really, what I should have done is just clicked into here as well. I can do it here as well, but I meant to record that in my then step. Let's just quickly add another one, audit check. I'll just give it a different label for now. Homepage 2. All right. But what you see there is the ability to click into the given step, the then step. You continue your recording journey, and wherever you've targeted, whichever step is where that code is going to be written to. Okay. For the purposes of this, that's all I need. I'm going to stop recording. I am going to give that feature a new tag. Let's call that accessibility check. All right, so the feature itself is tagged. So if I back out of the developer module now, you'll see that I've got a new feature over here that's been created. It's tagged with accessibility check. Here is the scenario I just created. User runs axe check on website. Given I load the homepage, then I can run an accessibility check. All right, just to show you what's going on under the hood. So remembering this is a JavaScript project. All right, so I'm looking at this now. I mean, I happen to be in RubyMine, which of course it's a Ruby IDE. It's not ideal for JavaScript, but it's just familiar to me. You're more often you'd either be in WebStorm maybe or Visual Code. All right, but what we see here is the feature that was created on my file system. There's my tag. There's my feature. Everything we built with the recorder. I've got a given and a then step. I'll find these in my step definitions. A new step definition file will be created that matches the feature name. All right, so we've got accessibility demo steps .javascript. And here's the code that was generated for me off the back of the recording that I just did. Okay, so it's going to manage the imports for me from Cucumber for the given and the then steps. It's going to obviously manage the test evolve imports that I need. But yeah, simply put, we have a line of code for loading the page. So await, of course. Test evolve.browser, that's driving the browser with a command go to, and then there is the URL that you would have captured as part of your recording, your test recording. And then as you see, to run an audit check, regardless of whether it's going to be a lighthouse check or an accessibility check via axe, it's one line of code, await test evolve.audit. And then you'll recall that I put some labels in, so to denote where I was in the test. So the first one was homepage, and then as I expanded and stepped into the then step, I added a second one, which is really where I intended to put that check in the first place. But of course, you'll see it's exactly the same, just with a different label. Okay, so if I come back to Flare, and of course we just want to see that run. So I'm just going to choose my tag, because I just want to run the one feature or the one scenario in this case. That's going to slim down the overall set of tests to the one that I'm interested in. Click on next. If you've worked with Flare, you'll be familiar with this now, but this Flare is just aside from the recorder. From a configuration and runtime perspective, it just enables me to make a bunch of choices as to how I want to run this test locally. Okay. In this case, I mean, it could well be a functional test, but actually the focus of the test when I run it this time is for the sake of auditing. All right, so I'm going to audit, and then I'm going to use Axe as my accessibility engine. I need a browser to do this. I'm running it locally rather than via Browser Stack, one of our integrations. I'm doing desktop rather than mobile emulation. And I can choose the browsers that I have available to me on my machine. I'll just pick Chrome for now. At the lowest level, you have a number of other choices around maximizing, resizing, closing the browser at the end of the test or leaving it open, using the same browser for a number of tests in succession, or not using a separate browser. I'm quite happy with the choices that it has there. You do have some timeout options there as well. So page load timeout defaults to 10 seconds, but if you've got a slow site or an underperforming test environment, you might want to bump that up to 20 seconds, for example. Default timeout is the maximum time that we will wait to interact with any given element within the DOM. All right, so let's just run this. There's one more thing that I'm going to do. I'm going to have a local test run report that I can see within Flare itself. But what I'm also going to do is just publish these results directly to Halo as well, right? This is where it all starts to come to life. So let's just activate excuse me, my Halo reporting. We'll call this accessibility, check my spelling, underscore demo. In fact, let's take the underscore out. Accessibility demo. My project is 1. Let's enter the correct API key. No, we're not working with environments at the moment because I'm working directly with a URL on a page that I'm loading. But I'm going to run the test. Here we go. Let's see what happens. All right, so we'll see the run commands in the Flare console. You can see reference to the tag there, accessibility check. It should spin up a browser for me. Probably got debug activated, so you'll see some of what's going on under the hood. We'll wait for our Chrome browser to open. Here it is. It's going to go to our element capture page, very quickly run an accessibility check, and then stop. Okay, so that test has passed. That's just your initial kind of verification in the console itself. I switched on the run report, so I have that locally as well. Okay, not much to talk about, of course, because all we did was load a URL and then run an accessibility check. But really, if we start to dive into Halo right now, on our unassigned labels page, there we go. So I'm into Test Evolve Halo, the reporting platform. This was the test that I just ran. This was the label that I gave to my reporting job. And we can see here that we have a completed accessibility testing that completed 52 seconds ago. And straight away it tells us this is what we call a run card. This is our first view of what just happened. So we ran 2 checks. So you'll recall I had homepage and homepage 2. All right. So across those 2 checks, we had a total of 14 violations. All right, so we don't refer to them as bugs at this point. We refer to them as violations against the accessibility standards that you were testing for compliance against. All right, and then it gives me kind of my worst case position. So across those 14 violations, that's made up of 6 critical, 6 moderate, and 2 serious. All right, so if I want to start to understand a little bit more about that, I can now start to click through. Okay, we'll come on to this in just a second. Let's just quickly revert back to our Flare. Let's just have a quick look at a TypeScript project. Now you're not going to see much difference here at all, but if I open this project now, so support for TypeScript is something we've introduced quite recently. So if you do have a preference for that, you can now build that, manage that through Flare itself. If I come down here, let's, if I come back to RubyMine, let's just open up the TypeScript project as well. And of course, you're not going to see much difference, but what you will see, of course, is that things have a .ts extension. Okay, so I could do, let's just do the same thing with this TypeScript project. So let's develop a new test. New feature will be even briefer than normal. Axe check. Accessibility demo. Given I load the website, then I can run an Axe check. So just once again, Axe is the accessibility engine that we have integrated with for actually making these accessibility determinations. All right, so in the same way, I'm doing it in a TypeScript project now. Let's just very quickly record a test. So there's the element capture page. Let's just go to that. I expand my then check, and I'm just going to run an audit check. And just for some differentiation, we'll call this TypeScript homepage. All right, just so we see the difference. And that, again, that's as far as I need to go with that one. Okay, so let's just, in fact, I'll come back in here. Let's give that a label, TS demo. Okay, and then I can run this in exactly the same way. This is a TypeScript project now. So where's our label? TS demo. There we go. Next. This is going to recall my settings from the last time I ran a test, so I want it to run in exactly the same way, so that's all good. Click on next. We'll keep the local report, we'll keep Halo, but I will just extend this with TS for TypeScript, just so we can see the difference. I mean, you will see no difference, but it's nice to be able to do it in either JavaScript or TypeScript, of course. All right, and then we'll get back into looking at the actual results that we see. Okay, so there's my browser. It's possibly a little bit faster in TypeScript. Okay, but there's our report once more. If I come right back to Halo, there was my first one here now 5 minutes ago, and here's the one I just did in TypeScript, okay, 17 seconds ago. All right, interesting. That's actually recalled less violations at that point. But we're at the mercy of the Axe engine and the command line way in which we integrate with it at the moment. What's important with these is that you start to dive in and understand what these Axe checks are telling you about the page that you've just executed that test upon. So through the run card, now I'm looking at the JavaScript version now again. All right, so we knew here we had 14 violations, 2 checks. What we start to see in this central widget, this latest violations widget, we see the standards, the accessibility standards for which a violation has been registered. So ACT, WCAG single A standard, there were 8 violations against that standard. Okay, and we see 12 against section 508, and then we see 6 violations against the best practice assessment, if you like. As far as Test Evolve and Halo is concerned, if you have, and it explains it here on the left hand side, if you have even just a single violation, this will be considered a failed test because you are running accessibility checks. So really only if you have a completely clean sweep would Test Evolve consider that to be a passed test. All right, so this has failed, 1 or more accessibility violations. And then over here we can see our scenario. Okay, so user runs an Axe check on their website. 2 checks, 6 critical, 2 serious, 6 moderate. I can now click into that to actually get to grips with the detail. All right, so this is what we call a run report at this level. All right, complete transparency to our feature, so accessibility demo, our tags, accessibility check, our scenario name, which is user runs Axe check on website. And then we always show the given step and then the then step in this case. You'll recall that I ran 2 checks, 1 in the given, 1 in the then. This had a homepage label, this had a homepage 2 label. And of course this was the same check on the same page, just being run twice. So it's recalled, the same violations. You can raise a bug from here, but the first thing you're going to want to do is to step into it. To start to see what it's telling you about, right? So we've got 3 criticals. So what are these criticals? So in this case, I have a critical because I've got a button on that page that doesn't have discernible text. It looks like that was the button on the cookie banner clearance. All right, I've got another critical here. It's telling me there is a label component. Form elements must have labels. Okay, so a lot of my the elements that we have built intentionally on the element capture page are missing this HTML attribute, if you like, the labeling side of it. All right, so it tells me what it is, gives me a description of the element on the page, it gives me the source, okay, within the DOM, and then it gives me instructions on what needs to be done to address that violation. All right, so we won't get into the breadth and depth of that right now, but for everything that you have critical, there's quite a few there. There's my 3rd critical. All right, so a select element must have an accessible name. Okay, so I am missing that on my page, hence the critical. And then you're going to get into the serious, the moderate. What's the serious? Okay, so IDs of active elements must be unique. So it's telling me that there's possibly more than one of these on the page. All right, so that's what your Halo reporting is going to tell you to start with. So let's just come back. Let's have a look here. In fact, what I want to do now is just move my data around a bit. So I've created a webinar node here, so I can create my custom hierarchy. I just kind of come from this 3-dot context menu and I can create a node, and that's what I did in order to build this. My data arrived, it was a new run, so it arrived for the first time on the unassigned labels page, but actually I now want to put it in a place where it's going to live for future runs. So I can click on this and just put it into webinar. There we go. And then let's confirm that. It will drop off the unassigned labels page. I can also do it from here as well. So if I come into webinar, here's the one that I just moved across. Let's manage labels now. Let's just add accessibility demo. There we go. I think that was the second one. Boom. There we go. So it's very easy to move your data around and place it where you want it. And so if I run another test now for either that TypeScript project or that JavaScript project, and the label here, the accessibility demo or the demo TS label remains the same, and it's still an accessibility test, then this data, the updated view of that run, will come immediately onto this webinar node here. Okay. All right. So just from here then, so when we were looking at these, if you really now want to get to grips, or what you're thinking about raising bugs off the back of this because you agree that it's something that needs to be addressed, you can step out to the Axe guide, and it's really going to give you an even more detailed breakdown of why this is a problem. It's going to give you some context to the type of user, and this is where it's really important. The type of user that would struggle with this particular violation and why you should address it. So we'll look at that now. So when you've reviewed your violations in Test Evolve Halo, if you were to follow the Axe guide link out from Halo, for that particular violation or that violation type, it's going to take you to this DQ University page. All right, so we really consider this the Bible or the source of truth, right, for these issues that your automated test is finding for you. All right, so this gives you everything you need to kind of diagnose it, to conclude that yes, it's definitely something we need to fix, to give you the context, as I say. But as we'll see in a second, it gives you all of the information for you as a tester to be able to raise a really good quality bug, get it on your backlog for your development team to pick up and work on. Okay. So for any link that you follow through, it's going to tell you exactly the origins of it. So the rule ID, so this in this particular case, it's a button naming rule ID or convention. It's part of the Axe Core 4.7 rule set. It confirms the criticality for you, which we already knew. And then it just reconfirms the specific standards that it is not complying with, should we say. So the key things within this page, how to fix the problem. So give this to a front-end developer. So you've got the correct markup options. Okay, so in this particular case, it's got 5 patterns that would pass the test criteria. Okay. And then it also gives you some bad examples. So some incorrect markup solutions, things that you shouldn't do. Okay, there's a section on why it matters. So in this particular case, screen reader users are not able to discern the purpose of elements with role equals link, role equals button, or role equals menu item that do not have an accessible name. All right, so that's why we're looking at this. So aside from that, the most useful thing I personally find is if you come straight down to this bottom right hand widget, it simply says compliance data and impact. So there's a sliding scale of criticality, so we're right at the far end, the right hand side. So this is a problem. You're going to want to address this and have a ticket on your backlog to do that. And then it starts to kind of add a sense of reality to it, right? So the disabilities that are affected, so visually impaired, so blind people, and deafblind, so visually impaired and people with auditory challenges as well. Okay, confirmation of the standards, so 2.1 single A, 2.0 single A, section 508, and then it goes to an even lower level. So within the WCAG 2.1, it will tell you that it's a must. Okay, it gives you the 4.1.2 location of that particular rule set or that violation within the standard, and equivalent information for kind of section 508. Okay, so what this then allows you to do, once you've got that knowledge, that understanding, you have all of this at your disposal to then really craft a quality bug. Okay, so everything that we've just taken a look at, if you're raising a ticket in Jira, for example, you want to feed as much of that information as possible into that ticket, so your delivery team have the context to prioritize it, to begin working on it, to immediately introduce the correct code solution to deal with it, to stop it being a violation. So yeah, you can do your job to the best of your ability by feeding as much relevant information through when you're raising that bug. Okay. Just one final thing to note on the Halo side of things. Let's just pick a different node here. I mentioned before the idea of making accessibility testing part of your CI/CD pipeline. So, moving away from just this idea of random, ad hoc, periodic accessibility checks, every few months. When you start to make it a regular part of what you do, you can then start to benefit from Halo's ability to show you some trend analysis. All right. So we can flick between time duration of the actual runs there, but the violations that have been recorded over a number of runs, right? So you have this historic view, and you can start to see how things are trending. Are they getting better or worse? And it's not just the number of violations; it's split by criticality. All right, so you will get a view on how your criticals and your seriouses are your serious violations are trending over time. Are you collectively as a delivery team getting on top of this as an issue? Coming back to your organizational objectives of building good quality web applications. And of course, you have all of this run history down here in Halo as well. So, for any given run, you can go back in and get the specific checks or the violations for that particular run. So having this historical view, is nice and powerful. Okay. So when we then come to start talking about how we run this from a continuous testing point of view, I said earlier there were two schools of thought. And quite simply, those are choice A or choice one. Do you have a dedicated selection of tests that essentially traverse your application page by page and run an accessibility check on each of those pages? Okay, that's the first option. The second option is the use of existing tests. So you've already built a suite of 200 functional regression tests on your e-commerce web application that do a whole bunch of things, from registering a new user to searching for a product to adding a product to cart, completing the checkout process with different payment methods, going to the My Account profile, all this kind of stuff. You'd already have tests that would functionally cover those areas. So the second approach is simply to use those and just inject that extra line of code that says test-evolve.audit with the label, as you saw when we were recording the test. So you can just add audit checks to your existing tests where you know that a certain set of functional tests cover all of the pages in your application where you would wish to run these checks. All right. There are pros and cons to both. So if we come back to the first one, so if you build a new feature with new scenarios and given when then steps, so a dedicated set of accessibility tests. All right, so kind of things to consider. So new tests required to be written across pages where existing tests most likely already cover. So there's somewhat duplication of effort there, but it's quick and easy to do, as we've seen in the recording process today. One potential downside of doing that is that your BDD scenarios start to turn more into accessibility testing requirements, and they're not so much about user journeys anymore. The jury's out on that one. Typically, BDD scenarios and features are there to describe user functionality. Okay, but actually, why can't accessibility requirements be defined in the same way? So, there's two schools of thought on that point alone, I would say. All right, point number 3. So less tests can be used to achieve the same accessibility auditing goals. So you might figure out that, if you've got 15 pages on your site that you want to run checks on, I mean, you could do that in a single test. You can go from page to page to page, or you could break that down into 3 or 5 scenarios to give a little bit of separation. So it's potentially faster to, within an hour or two, you probably create all of the accessibility scenarios you would need to. I think a key one here, if you do them as separate, dedicated accessibility tests, there is far less risk of a failing functional test, therefore stopping a subsequent accessibility check, if you see what I mean. So if you incorporate an accessibility check in a fairly lengthy e-commerce checkout flow and it doesn't make it all the way to the end of the checkout, a failing functional test might block one of your page-based accessibility audits. So by keeping them separate within unique accessibility scenarios, that's a definite advantage there. One thing to think about, if you do build them separately, you will require a separate CI pipeline and a corresponding config for those to run. But again, it's not a big deal. It's just something to think about. So coming on to the time when you may choose to use your existing tests. Okay, well, clear benefit is that those tests are already written. They already exist. All you've got to do is select them and just add this single line of code. All right, so very quick and easy to do that. However, to make that determination, you would need to review all of your functional tests and understand which of those would cover certain pages within your application. Again, not a big deal, but there's a little bit of time spent there to pick from your existing set of tests the ones that will be suitable for accessibility tests. Now, you may find that this approach, you actually need to run more actual tests to achieve the same page-based coverage, if you like. So what in the first situation where you can maybe write even 1, 3, or just 5, for example, accessibility tests, it may take 25 or 30 of your existing tests to ensure that you do touch every page of your application that you want to run, right? So straight away, you're running more tests, that job is going to be slower. All right, so just something to think about. One advantage by just incorporating accessibility audit single lines of code within your existing tests is that your BDD scenarios themselves, they retain their original integrity. All right, we're not changing the scenarios, or we're not writing new scenarios to reflect just accessibility style checking. The scenarios that you would be using in this instance would still very much refer to the functional user journey, which is what we really always want when we're looking at a kind of a purist BDD approach. Okay. And then the same thing applies here. You would have a separate CI pipeline and config, because in the situation where we are running functional tests, yes, it's a subset of tests that we already have, but in this case, we actually want to run them as audit-based checks rather than functional checks. So you would still require a separate CI pipeline and config. Okay, so just some things to consider, but this is really how you can start to incorporate it with your continuous testing pipeline. The benefit being, I think, that you start to develop a longer term view of accessibility against your application within your organization. You start to pay attention to this idea of trends. By putting it or surfacing this data in a Halo real-time dashboard, you're exposing a greater audience of people to the concept of accessibility, to the point that it becomes higher and higher on everybody's priority list. It gets the focus that it rightfully deserves, and it helps your organization to actually stand a chance of meeting these accessibility compliance objectives. Okay. So really that's it. As I say, go back, look at our previous videos. If you want to see a Ruby example, we covered that in our YouTube session from a year ago, and we did a bit of a deeper dive into some of the accessibility concepts. But the purpose of this was really to be as brief as we can. Definitely focus a little bit on 2.2, which we did. We saw these 9 additional checks. We actually concluded that really only one of those 9 became something that you could add to an automated test on top of what you've already done potentially. It really hammered home the point that a good 45% of accessibility checking testing remains in the manual sphere. That's it's always going to be the case. But then we looked at the idea of how quickly it is to record an accessibility test. We looked at some JavaScript, some TypeScript examples. Very soon within Test Evolve Flare, you'll have the option to do that in Python as well. So we've now got this 4-way language support for your testing and your accessibility testing. Okay, and then we looked at the idea of continuous testing and how you might choose to set up your CI pipeline, how you might choose to write and run new tests or use your existing tests. So these are all options that are available to you, but the key thing is just to get started, right? And a framework like this with Flare and TypeScript or JavaScript, in this case, it's going to allow you literally within minutes, as you've seen, to go to a URL, add an accessibility check, run that test, and then fire that data straight into Halo, and then start to see where you have these violations against certain standards. Just to add, within Test Evolve Spark, you can specify individual standards to scan against as well. So if you're only interested in WCAG 2.2 AA, that is a very specific version of a specific standard that you can isolate to assess your application against. Okay. So to that end, hopefully this has been useful to you. Please, like and subscribe to our channel. If you want to, make progress with this as soon as you can, why not take advantage of our 30-day evaluation? It's a fully featured evaluation. It has everything you need. So everything you see over here in our documentation by way of testing types, features, things that you can explore for yourself. Our GitHub documentation here will take you through that. It's all available to you, fully featured version of the product for 30 days. But until next time, thank you very much for your time. And like and subscribe, keep an eye out for what's coming next, but probably something on Python. See you then, cheers.